Welcome and thank you for stopping by Sheila's Audiobooks, and I am Sheila. This recording is coming from South Texas. All stories on this recording are in the public domain per United States copyright law. This story is about Officer Grogan witnessed the holdup of a jewelry store. His fair eyesight could recognize the two mugs even if they were wearing masks. In fact, he even saw you, Varno, without a mask. In the excitement it became loose. But Grogan was the witness. Without his testimony, you could laugh off any arrest for robbery and murder. Yes, the clerk in that store died. Then Officer Grogan suddenly disappeared. A grave for Grogan. Detective Lieutenant Pat Kennedy wasn't an acrobat, but he certainly looked like one as he swung from a rope and guided himself down the sheer side of a brick wall. Foot by foot he descended, his objective a window 10 stories above the ground. Once this building had been a theater, but enterprising promoters had turned it into a nightclub with a few hidden rooms that served as gambling dens. The place was equipped with all kinds of protective devices to announce the orthodox coming of an intruder. Somewhere inside the building were two dangerous killers, men who hated police officers with the intensity bred over long years of fighting them. Kennedy knew the danger he faced, but it added to his determination to take the men dead or alive. He slid down the rope another notch and his toes touched the windowsill. He clung to the rope with one hand, used the other in an attempt to raise the window, and swore softly when it refused to move. He drew a knife, opened the blade with his teeth, maneuvered it expertly, and the latch was forced back. A moment later he was inside. Kennedy snapped on his flash, avoided a cheap desk and a couple of chairs. He opened the door, listened, and when he heard nothing, stepped into the hallway. Tony Judel and Joe Varno were holed up in here. It wasn't the first time that this place had been used as a cooling-off spot for men with the heat on them. Kennedy mopped sweat with his handkerchief and drew his hip-bolstered gun. He spun the cylinder experimentally and then moved in the direction of a door beneath which a stream of yellow light shone. He listened outside the door for a moment and heard the sound of ice clinking in glasses and the slap-slap of playing cards as they were thrown on a smooth surface. He tightened his grip on the knob, turned it gently until the latch was all the way back. Then he put his foot against the panels and gave the door a mighty kick. Simultaneously he catapulted into the room. Both men seated at a small table were on their feet instantly. One reached behind him and the lights winked out. Kennedy raised his flashlight, pressed the switch, and for a bare second the path of light revealed two thugs, their teeth bared in a snarl of hatred. Then a gun blasted and the flashlight seemed to be picked out of Kennedy's grip by an invisible force. Kennedy lunged toward the open door. One of the thugs, bent on making a break, met Kennedy head-on. Both men were sent reeling back by the impact. Kennedy was the first to recover. He jumped forward, located the thug with his hands and punched for the crook's chin. He missed and took a glancing blow on the cheek. The thug's fist suddenly was seized in an iron grip. Cursing and yelling to his companion for help, he felt himself yanked forward. Kennedy hammered a short jab into the pit of his enemy's stomach and drew a sharp grunt of pain as a reward. The thug was doubled up. Kennedy judged the direction of his chin, slapped an experimental jab in that direction and followed it up with a vicious hook. The thug fell backward and landed with a thump that resounded through the huge, empty building. As Kennedy turned, the other man leapt on his back. Two strong hands grasped his throat and squeezed hard. Kennedy reached up, secured a grip on the long, disheveled hair of his opponent and pulled. He sent the man upward and over his head to finally crash against the wall 4 feet distance. Kennedy found a match in his pocket. As the tiny flame cast flickering shadows around the room, he saw that the first crook was reaching for the gun he had dropped. Kennedy kicked the weapon away, discovered the light switch and turned it on. He whipped out his own gun, smoothed his hair back and pulled a chair into the middle of the room. "A fine way to welcome a visitor," he said grimly. "Come on, you two, get up." The shorter of the pair was Tony Judel, a baby-faced, pink-cheeked killer. Joe Varno was a gangling, 6-footer. Both men arose warily and kept their hands shoulder-high. Kennedy indicated a Davenport across the room. "Have a seat, boys. This is a social call." Giovanni made a wry face. Yeah, you just dropped in for tea. We know you, Kennedy. We know why you're here too. You think Tony and me bumped off your pal Grogan. If we did, you prove it. Kennedy restrained an impulse to put his gun away and use his bare fists again. For once in his life, Kennedy almost believed in the third degree. Then he shrugged and relaxed. Look, you two, he said grimly. Grogan and I were friends for 20 years. A month ago Grogan witnessed the holdup of a jewelry store. He didn't have a camera eye, but anyone with even fair eyesight could recognize you two mugs even if you were masked. In fact, he even saw you, Varno, without a mask. In the excitement jaws became loose. But Grogan was the witness. Without his testimony, you could laugh off any arrest for robbery and murder. Yes, the clerk in that store died. It's bad for the health of a 68-year-old man to be slugged on the head with a gun butt. Tony Judel leaned forward. We don't have to listen to this baloney, he snapped. If you're making a pinch for that job, go ahead and make it. You can't prove anything. You just said Grogan was the only man who could convict us. Sure of yourself, aren't you? Kennedy said. You know that Grogan is dead. Somebody lured him to an isolated section a week ago. He never came back. You two birds did that because it was the only way to save your own skins. You knew Grogan would keep on going until he landed you. Varno started to get up, but a gesture of Kennedy's gun reseated him on the Davenport. Okay, copper, you can put the cuffs on me. I don't know what you're talking about and my lawyer will have me out of the coop in 2 hours. Kennedy drew his handcuffs, approached the pair cautiously and cuffed Judel's left wrist to Varno's right. Then he sat down again. Both crooks used their free hands to wipe their sweating faces. It was early autumn and there was a faint chill to the night air outside, but they were perspiring profusely. I know I can't convict you of killing Grogan, Kennedy went on, because nobody saw you kill him, and we have no corpse for evidence. You win so far, but I've got a little proposition for you. Grogan came of an old Irish family. He was a superstitious soul, believed in ghosts and banshees and the idea that a man's soul can't rest if his body isn't decently buried in his own grave. Makes you laugh, doesn't it? Varno spat on the floor. Listen, copper, we don't know anything about Grogan. We're glad he's dead. I wish every flatfoot in the world was dead, but that don't say we knocked Grogan off. What do you want us to do, give the poor stiff a decent burial? Kennedy walked over and stood before them. All right, you asked for it. Grogan told me this, that if he died at the hands of murderers, he'd return somehow to tell me who they were. Laugh that off. You don't believe in ghosts. Well, neither do I, but Grogan didn't. Sometimes a man's beliefs transcend the doubts of others. I think Grogan will come back. I think he'll drive you two mad. What are you sweating about if you're not worried? It's not hot in here. I'm sick of listening to you talk. Varno snarled. Take us in. We been pinched before and we always got out. This time ain't no different. Kennedy looked down at them. He continued talking just as though he'd never been interrupted. Grogan worked hard on that jewelry store stick-up and murder. He knew you were the killers and he checked up. He found out that you maintain 4 different hideouts to hole up in when the heat is on. He planned to raid those places, but you got him first. Unfortunately, Grogan never told anyone the location of those spots, with the exception of this joint. That's how I found you. Now Grogan is dead. I know he is. I can feel it even in here. His body is hidden and his soul is crying out for a decent burial. The corpse is at one of those hideouts. This is your last chance to produce it. Judel shrugged his shoulders in contempt. He's clean off his nut. Maybe we better call a cop to protect us, huh? Kennedy reached down, grabbed Judel by the collar and shook him violently. You won't laugh long, either of you. I'll find his body. Hey, what's the matter with you guys? Both thugs sat stiff as boards, staring past Kennedy. Their faces were slowly draining of color. Judel's lips twitched. Kennedy turned around and gave a loud gasp. There was a radiator across the room and on the white wall above it were faint, pinkish marks. Like writing being created by some invisible hand. Gradually the marks became brighter and brighter while 3 men stared with intense awe at the phenomenon. There were 4 lines of it. The color of the writing gradually became blood red and then, as if the ink had really been warm blood, the letters ran. Grogan. Kennedy exhaled. Grogan, his handwriting. Blood. It's written in blood. As if some mysterious force impelled him, Kennedy approached the wall. He read the 4 lines and their meaning was at once clear. The ghostly hand had written 4 locations, 4 places which only the dead Grogan and the 2 terror-stricken killers in this room could possibly know. Kennedy reached up automatically and his finger touched the wall. As he backed away, the words seemed to fade. Varno jumped up. "It's a trick. A trick to make us talk." Kennedy approached them. He extended his hand and they shrank back at the sight of the crimson stain on his fingers. Very deliberately Kennedy touched Varno's hand. The crook stared down at the wet, warm blood that was smeared across his flesh. He let out a weird wail and fell back on the sofa. Judel just sat there, staring at the wall like a man entranced. Kennedy looked again. The handwriting had faded into oblivion. He whirled on his 2 prisoners. "So you don't believe, eh? Well, I'll admit that I didn't, either. I was trying to scare you into a confession, but I didn't have anything to do with that writing on the wall. I wasn't even near the wall. Nobody was. Grogan wrote those words in blood. His own blood that you 2 hyenas spilled." "A trick," Varno mumbled. "It was a trick. There ain't no ghosts." Then he looked down at his hand again and gulped. There certainly was blood, anyway. It was clotting into a stiff mass. Kennedy jerked both men to their feet and drew his gun. "We're traveling. This is how Grogan would have wanted it. Get going." Where? Varno gasped. There were 4 addresses written on the wall by Grogan. It wasn't a trick. Such things can't be faked. Those addresses are the ones I wanted, the ones Grogan alone knew. We're going there. Something tells me Grogan will be there, too. When we reach the right one, he'll give us a sign. But you can't do that," Varno protested shrilly. "You can't. It's inhuman." Judel recovered some of his wits. "Or pipe down. I tell you it's a new kind of 3rd degree. Nobody can tell me there's ghosts or that Grogan is walking around scaring us." "Go ahead, copper, do anything you want. We don't know a thing." Kennedy marched them downstairs, across the big ballroom and out the door. His car was parked around the corner and he forced them into the front seat. He unlocked one cuff, jerked Varno toward the steering wheel and passed the chain around it. He clapped the other cuff on Judel's wrist. Both thugs were hunched almost on top of one another. Kennedy's hands shook visibly as he reached into the glove compartment for another flashlight. "Don't tell me you're uncomfortable," he said. "But I hope you are. Now if you try any tricks, you'll be wrecked with the car and me. We're going to that first address Grogan wrote, the house near the public dumping grounds on the outskirts. If you rats buried Grogan, that's as clever a place as any." Neither of the prisoners replied. Varno still seemed incapable of speech and Judel was bolstering his courage by a constant stream of curses. Half an hour later Kennedy turned into a rutted road and stopped beside an abandoned house. Smoke and ashes from the burning dump covered everything. Kennedy unlocked one cuff, brought it around the steering post and promptly closed it in place again. He menaced his prisoners with drawn pistol. "Want to talk?" he asked softly. "Personally I'm not keen on what I must do. There's no telling what will happen." "We ain't got anything to talk about," Judel rasped. "You're nuts, copper, and Varno will be the same way pretty soon. But you're on the wrong track. We didn't knock off Grogan. Let's go." Kennedy jabbed Judel's spine with the gun. He forced them to march inside the rickety old house. Ashes coated the floor, the discarded furniture, the stairs and the banister. They entered the big parlor. Kennedy brushed off a straight-backed chair for himself and straddled it. Varno and Judel, backed against the wall, were sweating again. Judel's crafty eyes flashed across the floor. If anyone had been in this room within the last 2 days, footprints would have been visible. What you going to do?" Varno whined. "Keep us here all night?" "If it's necessary," Kennedy answered. "I don't think it will be. Grogan knows we're here. He'll give us some sign. You boys didn't know him very well. You didn't know how an idea stuck with him. Like the way he wanted to be buried, for instance. That would have followed him in death. You can't deny those words written in blood. This is one of your hideouts, isn't it?" "I never saw the joint before," Judel snapped. Kennedy lighted half-burned candles on the mantel. Varno seemed to perk up as if the light gave him new courage. Judel sneered. An hour passed without a word being spoken. Kennedy arose from time to time and moved the candles. In a short time they'd be consumed. He looked at the walls closely and then sat down again. The shirts of Varno and Judel were wet, their faces grimy and their eyes shining in fear. "Grogan!" Kennedy suddenly called out. "Grogan! Stop that!" Varno yelled. "Stop it, you're driving me nuts. I can't stand any more of this. I can't stand it, I tell you. Tony, look. It's that blood again. Grogan's blood." Kennedy arose so fast that his chair toppled over. He swiveled and his eyes grew wide. The setting was just the same as it had been in the gambling place. There was a bare wall on the north side of the room. A rusty, ash-covered radiator was set in the middle of it, and just above the radiator one word gleamed in blood-red letters. "No!" Varno shrieked in terror. Judel struck him across the face savagely. "Get hold of yourself, sap. The dick is staging this to make you sing." But Varno's eyes were riveted on the wall. The single word was slowly fading away, and at the same time the candles flickered as though a breeze passed before them. "We'll keep going," Kennedy announced flatly. "We'll visit the next place that Grogan wrote on the wall. If it's not the right one, he'll tell us. No ghosts, eh? Listen, you guys are so scared you can hardly walk, but if I wasn't trying to help Grogan, I'd be just as scared. Outside, and remember there's a gun on you." Kennedy said nothing as they drove back to town. A storm was raging somewhere in the west and Varno cringed with each flash of lightning. Judel just stared through the windshield. Kennedy stopped the car beside a huge warehouse on the riverfront. They were still uptown and the sounds of traffic didn't reach this spot. Kennedy walked his prisoners into the warehouse. At the door, Varno recoiled and began blubbering. Judel hit him again and whispered a warning. Kennedy marched them across the huge, empty floor toward a small office at the back. The warehouse hadn't been used in months. In the office they found a small desk, 2 chairs and a desk lamp that threw more shadows than light. "We'll wait," Kennedy said. "If it takes a week we'll wait. Grogan will come. He's bound to. He's restless. The ghosts of all murdered men are restless. Stand against the wall, you two. I'm going to look around." Kennedy lifted the metal shade off the desk lamp. He gazed at the 4 walls thoughtfully and then he gave a grunt. With long, eager steps, he walked over to the farther wall. His fingers ran across it. "Holes," he said grimly. "Bullet holes about the height of Grogan's heart. He was killed here. I know it, or he wouldn't have led us to this place. You stood him against the wall and blasted out his life." Varno groaned dismally. Even Judel seemed affected now. His eyes were bulging and once again the sweat rolled down his face. "But there should be blood stains," Kennedy went on. "I don't see any. You washed them off. Then you dragged his body out of here and buried it. Where? Talk, you pair of killers. Talk before Grogan comes back and makes you." Judel seemed to wilt. He said something, but it was so low that Kennedy couldn't distinguish the words. He stepped closer and Judel continued to mumble. Then, suddenly, the killer lunged forward. He had only one free hand, but he managed to smash home a vicious punch to Kennedy's face. The detective reeled, tripped and fell. Judel gave a howl of glee, yanked Varno with him and leapt on top of the detective. His free hand sought Kennedy's throat and fastened there, leech-like. His knees held the detective prone and Judel kept howling in pleasure. "Maybe your ghost will come back and haunt us, Kennedy. Maybe you'll write things on the wall to scare us. Anyway, you'll see Grogan. The 2 of you can have fun haunting me and Varno. Sure, that's it. See if you can scare us." Tony, don't kill him," Varno shrieked. "Don't do it. He'll come back, too. He'll meet Grogan. They'll both come back. Don't kill him. Grogan's ghost is enough." Judel had a savage answer on his lips, but the words wouldn't come. He was looking across Varno's slumped form. His eyes grew wide and bulged slightly. The murderous fingers around Kennedy's throat relaxed their grip. Varno let out a scream and Judel's own shriek joined in chorus. They got up and retreated, step by step. Judel had one hand thrust out as if to ward off the horror before them. Kennedy arose slowly, one hand stroking his discolored throat. He saw the same thing that made the killers cringe. There were 3 bullet holes in the wall. They formed a crude triangle and in their center drops of blood seemed to sprout out of the wood and slowly drip to the floor. They disappeared behind the steam radiator. Then mysteriously they could be seen again. drops of blood that gradually formed a straight line toward the door, like blood flowing out of the wounds of a murdered man. Kennedy had his gun out. Judel screamed. Kennedy grabbed his shoulder and forced him to follow the trail of blood that grew visible as they progressed. It led out of the office, across the white floor, and only Kennedy's flashlight revealed it now. Then Varno collapsed. He sank to his knees for a moment before he toppled over, pulling Judel down with him. Varno's breath came in jerks and his chest heaved like that of a dying man. Judel raised his head. Kennedy was shining the flash ahead, picking out the trail of blood as it formed before their eyes. Yes, we killed Grogan," Judel suddenly yelled. "We stood him against the wall. We shot him, both of us. There was blood on the wall. We cleaned it up. We dragged him out right along the floor where the blood shows. We cleaned that up, too. Make him go away, Kennedy. Make him go. I'll tell you where we hid the body. It's in the river, in a block of cement. We made it look like a wharf piling. Even that wouldn't hold him. Make him stop. I'll go crazy." Kennedy drew a long breath. Suddenly the warehouse was flooded with light. 4 detectives swarmed into the place. Judel saw them coming and the terror in his eyes was replaced by fear, not of ghosts but fear of the electric chair. "You heard him, boys?" Kennedy asked. "Send the diver down again. He saw that new piling yesterday, but he never suspected Grogan's corpse was inside of it. And thanks for the help." Captain Burke of the homicide squad slapped Kennedy across the shoulder. "I take back whatever I said about this dizzy scheme of yours. It worked, and that's proof you're a smarter man than me. Say that stuff looked great, didn't it?" Judel strained forward, pulling Varno's still unconscious form with him. "You mean that blood in the wall was phony? That Grogan ain't got no ghost?" "About the ghost, I wouldn't say," Kennedy smiled. "The blood, it was really a form of invisible ink made a great deal redder to resemble blood. It was painted on the walls before we arrived, but until heat struck it the words wouldn't show. Once I thought we were licked when the words started to run. You see, we put the chemical into a colorless wax to make the letters stand out better when heat brought them into visible existence. That's why you boys were sweating so much. Remember that the words appeared just above radiator? We had to have a lot of heat. These blood stains on the floor, they're caused the same way. There are men in the cellar who followed the path we created and heated the floor until the stuff showed. It was tough going in that house by the public dump. We had to spread ashes around to cover the footprints we made. That was real blood I smeared on your hand though. I cut my finger to get it." But how did you know them 4 hideouts?" Judel gasped. "Grogan was a good cop and good cops file reports every day," Kennedy said. "He recorded those 4 places just in case something happened to him. We checked up, found the bullet holes here and set our trap. Unless you confessed, we had nothing on you whether we found Grogan's corpse or not. We needed both the confession and the body. We saw faint marks where you dragged the body out and we arranged the blood spots accordingly." "Fooled," Judel groaned. Then he kicked at Varno and cursed. "If it hadn't been for this mug, I'd never have fallen, but he was supposed to be a tough guy. When he cracked, I figured there was something to it." "Take them out," Kennedy sighed. "And Judel, you'll know very soon whether or not there are ghosts. The electric chair will provide the means." Thank you for listening to today's episode. I really hope you enjoyed it. There will be more to come. Please subscribe not to miss out on what is next. I will be looking forward to your return. The music is by Madfan from Pixabay. To support this and other artists, go to pixabay.com. Sheila.